What's up, folks? Welcome to episode 57 of the Emulsion podcast. My name is Justin Khanna. Today's guest is Brent Herrig, food photographer extraordinaire from New York City. He's incredibly talented at not just capturing food and drink, but telling stories through portraits and fantastic action shots of that kitchen life. His list of clients includes Eric Ripert, New York Times, Food and Wine, Bon Appetit, Anthony Bourdain, and Parts Unknown, Daniel Humm of 11 Madison Park, Gavin Kaysen, and so many more. In this episode, we cover a myriad of topics from things like working for free, using industries like music and fashion as your inspiration during your creative process, actually finding and leveraging that creative freedom, his favorite meal in New York City, chefs he's always wanted to shoot for, and most importantly, we talk about why you, yes you, even if you're on your first day of culinary school, should be thinking about marketing yourself in some way, shape, or form. I got a ton of inspiration from Brent when I found his Spoonfuls of Inspiration series at Staple House Restaurant in Atlanta, and from there I just reached out to him and I wanted to do this interview, and I was not disappointed. We talk all about that project, that Spoonfuls of Inspiration project as well, and why Grey Kunz spoons are bullshit. But in all seriousness, I sincerely hope you folks enjoy this interview, because I genuinely took this interview as an opportunity to ask Brent some questions that I'm personally struggling with. And if at any point you want to check out Brent's stuff, it is linked down below or on justinkhanna.com/podcast. This is also the first time I ever did a Google Hangouts interview. Brent actually suggested it through that collaboration effect. And it was really cool because we were able to pull up some images from his site while we were talking to reference while we were chatting. So this is one of those few episodes where the video version might actually be the better version to listen to. But if you folks enjoyed this style of interviewing through Google Hangouts, let me know and I will do this more moving forward. But, you know, here, just listen to the interview. So I'd love to start with a little State of the Union, just kind of like get people a little bit interested in who you are and your kind of stance on the food media state of how things are with the internet and everything, especially from a photographer's perspective, right? Because you've been in the biz for a while.
Definitely. So in my opinion, the food industry and the media side of the food industry in particular has gone through a really good evolution throughout the last, I would say, 10 years. I started in the industry about 10 years ago. So I was kind of right at the beginning of that, which was really good. And, you know, I developed a kind of a niche for myself that was very in the food industry, telling the food stories, restaurants, chefs, makers, farmers, whatever it may be, you know, photographing them throughout their whole journey, whether it be the portraits that I'm doing or the documentary work that I'm doing with them. Or just simply the plates or the cocktails that I'm shooting. So I've been doing that for about 10 years. I've been in the city for 10 years. I've been an assistant, worked my way up through the photo industry, was a producer for a while, and then about 7 years ago, I went full-time and have been shooting on my own ever since.
And was that was the start of New York City food photography?
Actually, that website came along. So my main website is just brentherrig.com. But NYC Food Photography was, for me, a marketing opportunity. I saw the website available and I had it offered to me and I picked it up. And it's just yet another outlet for people to go to. I also have cocktailphotographer.com. You know, it's great SEO as well. So totally.
She'll show right up there with Google. So take it back for me. When you said that you would start by photographing for these makers and chefs and people with food, was that something where they would need photography services to market their stuff, or you wanted to build your own portfolio? Like, tell me, like, take it back and dive a little bit deeper into that.
So to go all the way back, I actually got my start. I was doing fashion for a while and documentary work for a bit. Didn't love the fashion industry. A friend of mine, Simon Glenn, had a pop-up shop, and he was starting a catering restaurant and asked me if I could photograph his menu. So I was like, oh yeah, why not? How hard can food be to photograph? And then I realized it's very hard to photograph. But people loved what I was shooting and people liked the style that I was shooting in. So I threw away my fashion book and took about 2 or 3 weeks to photograph different places around the city that I wanted to photograph. So I went to them and was like, hey, like, let me photograph some, this, and this. I'll give photos to you just for me to build my portfolio, and send it out there, and started getting jobs.
Totally.
Yeah, so I mean, marketing has always been at the forefront of my business, making sure that I am getting in front of the right people and shooting the right kind of jobs that I want to be shooting.
And was that the reasoning behind taking all the fashion stuff and just saying no way with it, because you're never going to have a fashion person ask you to do food stuff?
I think in the photo industry in general, you need to have a specialty. Obviously, I could photograph fashion. I can photograph, portraits. I can photograph whatever. But to have an identity for yourself, you have to kind of, just like a chef, do you cook? Is your restaurant, Italian, or is it French, or is it Brazilian, And what is your identity? So that's kind of how a photographer looks at it. And what do they want to cook for the long run?
Right.
Obviously, they could go to any event and cook something else. So same thing.
When does it get to a point, though, where you feel like it actually becomes or maybe it doesn't ever get to this point and you feel like there's no value in it, but does it ever get to a point where it's valuable to have that like hyphen in your thing, where it's like, well, Brent does food photography through the lens of fashion, or he's super inspired by fashion, or like I think about certain chefs who have that fusion element to it, right? Like where does that weigh in for you, if it does, or maybe it doesn't?
No, it definitely does. Let's see. So to have those influences, I think, is a good thing. And I mean, music for me influences me every day. Food influences me. So I think bringing it back to like where I started in fashion, I wasn't happy with it. And I kind of loved the chef industry in itself. Working on a fashion shoot. I mean, there's a lot of guys out there that do it, and probably that will be listening to this as well.
Right.
More power to you guys. Like, I'm not fashionable myself, so therefore, fashion isn't for me.
If the love's not there,
exactly.
Much more love with the food.
I love food, and I love cocktails, and I love to work with chefs and make them happy. Just kind of that collaboration effect.
Yeah, so that's super motivating for you then to remain engaged with the food and continue to pursue it. Because is there a point where you stray away from the projects that start to feel like what part about it with food would make it start to feel like that with fashion for you? I helped cook the food for the first class menu for Alaska Airlines the other day. And I had a friend message me where it was like, how bad was the food styling? Was it like lard ice cream and phone pics holding up the food? Like, what does it ever get to that point with you with food? You like the raw, unedited, kind of like a la minute?
So back in the 80s, I think there was a lot of that, like lard and like glue and cereal and things like that. I actually try to have a very real approach to food photography, especially if I'm doing advertising with it. If it's, if we're shooting noodles, we're shooting their noodles. If we're shooting, Campbell's soup, it is Campbell's soup. So there are ways to dress it up always to make it look the best that it possibly can. But that just means a lot of attempts and a lot of product on hand and that kind of thing. I actually like that I photograph portraits, plates, cocktails, and I think that diversity alone gives me enough diversity in my day-to-day. If I had to shoot for one client that was consistently one thing, I think that might be a hard challenge for me, just because I don't have that diversity. If you had to cook just tuna for the rest of your life,
yep,
probably get bored of it about a year in.
Right. Do you think there's any value, if there is anybody that's listening that it wants to start in photography, or I guess it would be any creative field? Would you advise them to take this thing that you love, that's fashion, and apply it to food, or whether it's hip hop, or like I had a meeting with a chef the other day who did a tasting menu all inspired by the food that Tupac and Biggie loved, and he like elevated it to an interesting level. Like, is there any value in that to you? Would you advise people to do that, or the specialization route is much more effective to kind of breaking out in the way the internet is now?
I think there's for anybody who's getting started like right away, if you think photography is what you want to do, or if it's something, and there's tons of opportunities around photography that you can also do, food styling. If you're a chef and if you're good at food, food styling is something is needed. There are a lot of people in the photo industry, and it's getting diluted really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And with a saturated market becomes, it's a lot harder to make a living.
Right.
And it's not all glitz and glam and, eating free dinners and things like that at all.
I mean, you're in the client service business, right?
Exactly.
Like that comes with just as many cons as it does pros, I guess.
Exactly. If they're not happy with one photo, that could ruin the whole shoot,
Mm-hmm.
So you have to really constantly be, looking at your own work and making sure that you're up on the top of your game. So I'd say for anybody who's getting into something, experiment with a lot of different things and look at where you are and have other people look and take criticism. I review people's work all the time. I take interns on and we talk, work together, and a lot of people come to me and say, hey, I'm a chef and I want to be a photographer. And I'm like, great, but look at your stuff.
Right.
Are you happy with this work? Is this your best work?
Sure.
I always make sure that they're thinking of how to do it better, how to do it the right way, how to explore that, whether it's just do a test shoot, go into a kitchen and say, or approach a friend who, cooks or something to that effect, and just shoot some stuff and see if it's fun. I had my last intern that I worked with, she came to me wanting to be a food photographer. And I was like, dude, you're good at food, but you're really good at architecture.
Got it.
So I was like, just this epiphany moment, I was like, tried to push her into it, and she loves it now, and she's doing that. So
more power. Yeah, more power to that.
Yeah. She had this Instagram that was had stunning rooftop stuff, and I was just like, dude, why are you going into food?
Mm-hmm.
This is your calling.
But it's so hard when you're in it, right? When you're in it and you've committed to yourself that you're going to learn to do food, and then it's you kind of put the blinders on, right? And you're oblivious to these other things that you may or may not be really talented at or have an eye for in your case.
Yeah, I think that's just, testing it out and being open to other opportunities as well.
Right.
Come along the way.
Do you have any stories that when you back when you started, when you would do certain things, do you have any stories that are either funny or kind of maybe horror stories about back when you started? I think about odd jobs that I took as a cook where I'd show up, the cliche story of showing up at the back door and being like, hey, can I work for you? Do you have any stories like that where you would kind of start for, working for free or
So my first kind of big break into the food realm was a free job. I did it for quite some time, but it was content and it was, good access to different chefs. So I approached a friend who's a writer, and she was working for Serious Eats at the time. And I approached her to wanting to do a hot chocolate recipe thing, pitching a story to a client. And we pitched it and nobody kind of picked it up. But then she was like, she came along and was like, hey, what do you think about doing portraits and plates of New York City chefs? And I was like, okay, sure, let's shoot some. And
when was this? Can you put it on the timeline?
This was pretty early on. This was in 2003, maybe, even maybe 2012.
And how long was that from leaving the fashion thing? And where was that in the food saga? Were you doing it for a year or?
So I assisted and came in, moved to New York. I started assisting all different fashion photographers, learning the light, understanding, the digital aspect of it, all of that, and just kind of, staging in a sense.
Right.
And that was for about 3-4 years, and then I started diving into my own stuff, shooting when I could, and then kept picking it up more and more. So that was kind of right in that transition period of, I was shooting fashion for some things, and then I was like, this isn't it. So
it's gonna trade, yeah.
So yeah, I think that was Serious Eats was probably my, work for free type thing, but it still got me into, I photographed probably at least for 1.5 years with them once a week. You know, it was only like an hour at a time, but we got into, 75 plus different New York City chefs. Got to photograph a ton of stuff, and I got introductions by doing that, to my first cookbook, for example. So
awesome. So there's a quote from Grant Achatz that says something along the lines of you do a job for money, experience, or connections.
Yep.
Do you feel like that job, the reason why it was so valuable is because it had like 2 of the 3, which is like super rare to find, where it had like you got a ton of experience and you made a ton of connections?
I would definitely agree with that. I say the same thing to people as well. You're either in it for the money. It's either good for the money or good for the exposure.
Mm-hmm.
And the exposure for that one was something that I was really proud about, as well as I had full creative freedom as well, which doesn't happen that often. So that was, people do test shoots all the time. And if you're doing a test shoot, it better be something that you want to shoot and that you're spending your time wisely on. Because if it's your resources and you're actually putting money up to do the shoot, then, you might as well make it something you need in your book.
Sure. When at that point did you decide that you were going to either stop working for free or it was time to move on, and what was that turning point, if there was one?
I don't think there was an exact point. I still will work pro bono for some places. I still do a few trades, but it's very rare that I do that now. It's got to be somebody that I really want to help out and I really want to, that I feel inspired towards. But at a certain point, the jobs were coming in, so it just kind of flipped, and I had to, you are the value that you make yourself, that you set yourself. So if you don't value yourself, then nobody else is going to value you.
Absolutely. I did want to talk about that for a second. You have this amazing portfolio now. Where are you at with that, where one thing is a certain point where it's like, this is a passion project and this is something that I'm really excited about, and then these are projects that just pay the bills? Is there a ratio that you're experimenting with or that you're comfortable with right now?
There's always an ebb and flow of that. I think the passion projects, don't pay the bills,
mm-hmm.
but I do them, to drive marketing aspects.
Got it.
People love to see what you're doing personally.
Right.
Things that you're experimenting on, things that you think are interesting. I mean, most art producers and ad agencies are going to go look at your personal projects over anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the balance of like the day-to-day jobs that I do just for the money, or, I try to approach every single job that I do with a sense of pride, and I want to make sure that it's good because it's my lens behind it. It's my eye behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not confident enough to put my name on it, whether it's on it or not, I always want to be proud of it. So.
Sure. And that's really important, is how, did you have any experience with saying no? I mean, I'm asking, this is kind of a selfish question, because it's my own personal thing that I'm running into with having to say no to certain things. Do you have any advice for that, and what you say no to? Because like sometimes it's a paycheck, but it's not as high as a paycheck that you want, but it's also like maybe the exposure is there, but you don't know if the exposure will actually be there. Like, where do you have to say yes and no? And
there's a fine line, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a fine line there that if you don't want to say no, up your rates.
Sure.
So it's worth it then at that point.
Right.
Say, hey, I am, but it's, this isn't the right job for me. I am willing to do it for you,
mm-hmm.
but this is that way it's worth the money
mm-hmm.
at that point. And I do say no to jobs every once in a while, not every once in a while, quite often, just because there isn't a value in it for me, and they don't understand the budget and what photography should cost. And it's a hard thing because most photographers don't talk about money.
Mm-hmm.
They don't like to talk about money. The budget idea is just like, everybody's always negotiating. So it's always a back and forth. So.
Right. That's my favorite I'm in the city of Chase Jarvis in Seattle, and that's one of his favorite things that he actually took from another person, where it's kind of like you want to give them the rate, and you don't want them to say yes right away, right? Like you want them to be like, I have to go talk to my manager. I really want to work with you. Like we'll get that sorted out, and then we'll come back and say yes to that rate, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the ideal scenario. When you take on a project now, what are some of your goals that you have now that you've kind of like carved out your own niche? Is it to kind of grow your portfolio, or is it more connections now? Or is it to convey the vision of that restaurant now that you're kind of comfortable with your aesthetic and that?
Yeah, I do have an aesthetic defines itself within my own edit of my website. Now, every project that I do, I try to make sure that I'm creating something unique for that place. A good example of that would be I work with Blacktail and Dead Rabbit, which are two sister bars. They're owned by the same place, and I do both of both the cocktail stuff for them. I wanted to make sure that I created a unique identity to Dead Rabbit, who had been starting with a long time ago. I did their cocktail book a few years back, and another one coming soon.
Awesome.
Yeah, so a little plug there.
Yeah.
And they brought me into the new project being Blacktail, which if anybody hasn't gone to and you want a good bar to go to in the city, it is awesome.
Totally.
Down on the tip of the island. But creating a different identity for that bar, and not just bringing the same light and the same look and feel to that. So this is Blacktail. We tried to create it's a Cuban style bar. So we tried to create like a little bit of a dreamier aspect, since Cuba has that kind of mystical vibe to it. Nobody really knows what it's like unless they've been there, which I have twice. They have a very tropical, Caribbean vibrance to their drinks, fresh.
Did you add the lens flare to some of those photos?
No, I try to get everything in camera. I did add a little bit of color to the lens flare. But as much as I try to do it all in camera.
I love the props that you're choosing.
It was simple things on there that they had in the place. So it was like, glassware, things like that. And then Dead Rabbit stuff. Sorry. So Dead Rabbit stuff is here. And they're a bit, they're an Irish bar, and they're a little bit more earthy, a lot more rooted with the whiskey, the flavors that they bring. Even the style of the bar has this, very like wood quality. So we tried to make sure that, we tell their story through, obviously we're shooting at the bars. In this case, I want to bring my own kind of lighting flair and touch to them and make it reflect who they are.
Question, how does that transpire? Like because I've had, I took a photography job here in Seattle where I was shooting for a restaurant. And again, it was the same. We wanted to make sure we were telling their story, and it was just stuff they were going to use for their social media, but they had a very unique, their tagline was inauthentic Eurasian food. And there's this guy who was coming from Chicago, and he didn't want to be like a Taiwanese place or like a play on Vietnamese or like Korean or whatever. He was using all of those techniques. So he called it inauthentic to kind of like protect his ass from anybody kind of coming and saying, you're not authorized to serve rice cakes. You know what I mean? But what does that process look like for you when you're talking to these people? Like, it seems like that you're justifying your high rate, right? Like you're doing all this research and you're asking them and you're providing props, and you're like, where did that come about for you? How do you, and what questions do you ask people?
Well, I like looking at what they have currently, and kind of I like talking to people and getting their vibe from them, and making sure that, every chef has a voice. So I want to make sure that I'm trying to emulate that voice through my photography as much as possible. And I really do love the collaboration effort that goes into it. That's kind of why I do food and cocktail photography, because there is a talent, an artist on the other end of my photography, and they're doing they're putting their heart and soul into a plate or a drink, and I want to make sure that I'm equally putting up the same amount of heart and soul into the photography that I do for them.
Totally, that means a lot.
To keep going on that question, I like having conversations with people, figuring out them, what kind of music they like, whatever it may be that might drive their style and might drive who they are and what their plate will look like, or even if it's a new restaurant that hasn't opened yet, It's a lot about, what the style is, what the mood board is, what the, color scheme is, what the tables are like, everything.
Is that usually a sit down conversation, or it's something where you're like, you start shooting or you start seeing the food? And because I feel like sometimes a lot of chefs try to tell their story, but then sometimes it gets a weird spin on it just for PR sake. Does it normally happen over the phone, or do you strictly rely on because at a certain point, the restaurant has to have a very defined concept, and it has to be very
Definitely
clear of what exactly they're trying to convey.
Having the conversation over the phone, or in person if I can, if the time allows, or if neither of those can happen, we take 5 to 10 minutes right at the beginning of the shoot and just like, don't bring out the camera yet, and just look around, feel it out, talk to them,
Have you ever thought about recording that? I think that could be really interesting.
I haven't, but I mean, maybe, you never know.
It could. I think it could be really cool. But was there anything else that you wanted to add with that?
No, I think that was it. I mean, trying to just making sure that you understand who they are, making sure that the chef's idea is coming through, and not like some PR person who's talking and saying like, oh, we need it to be this. Like, I understand that, but the client is the chef. So,
right. Right. And it's usually just you on these shoots. I mean, unless you have an intern helping you, you don't have kind of like an agent that you use to reach out to these people, or you're doing all of that legwork with.
I rely a lot on marketing. On some shoots, I do bring in stylists if they can, if they want that. Sometimes, ad shoots, obviously we can bring in the whole crew. And if the lighting is intensive enough, I bring on assistants and things like that. So yeah, it just depends on the job and the style. But most of the time, it is just me and my camera.
Good friend of mine is Bonjwing Lee, ulterior epicure, and all of his stuff is just him. He never, I mean, at least I've never heard of him traveling around with any sort of assistant or anything. When he would do shoots at the restaurant that I would work at, and it would just be like him standing on a chair. Where's the best natural light?
Figuring it out.
Boom, that's his style. And that's, do you enjoy shooting like that, or you prefer to have lots of people, or is there one where you're like, if it was your dream thing?
I think a good mix is the dream for me, because it allows me to, have me time and just, relying on myself to do it. And then also that teaching aspect I really enjoy. So bringing on people and like assistants and just, if having them evolve their skill and things like that is also really enjoyable to me. And then on the total flip side of it, of like the ad shoots, where you have a whole crew and you have this, already like this idea that's already kind of sketched out in a sense, and like making that come to life and making sure that all of the elements are there. That's like the producer in me that I really enjoy as well. So a good mix of it all.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I mean, maybe it would get to a point where you'd be like, I would cringe at the thought of having a crew behind me, and it's just, I just want it to be me and my camera and maybe one person. I was just curious to hear if there was.
I think my idea with age will definitely change.
Yeah. Yep.
Because going around New York City and lugging gear is a pain in the ass.
Mm-hmm. That's so funny. Speaking about New York City, is there a best meal that you've had since your time in New York City? One that particularly stands out where you're like, oh my God? My
most memorable is not in New York.
Okay.
So I think my most memorable in New York is probably from Cayo, which is a Laotian restaurant in Tribeca. Awesome Fett is the chef down there, and he is just a rad dude. They're killing it with the food every single time. The spice is just like awesome. Bang sauce is something. Yeah, and I think that's probably one of my favorites in the city. I think it's also like, memories and food and like who you're with, and at the time that all kind of adds to that. So, I mean, I've done birthdays there, I've done anniversary dinners there. So it's always like a place for celebration for me in the city. As far as like best meal I've had outside of the city, I would have to say hands down, Willow Inn, out on Louis Island.
Yeah, that's right out here.
Yeah, definitely. Blaine is just killing it too. So,
what was it about the meal? Did you get to shoot for him, or did you come as a vacation?
I went for vacation, but I ended up contacting him and shooting some at the restaurant, and I actually did a spoon of his as well while I was there. And something like there was the tasting menu in general that he does out there was just in like, it was a perfect moment with my wife and I. I was at a great point in my career. Things were going forward, upwards. She just got a promotion, I think, and like it's just like everything was right. Everything was going right, and the meal was epic.
So that just added to it.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Was there a dish that stuck out that you like still remember? Or maybe something that he served you that you never had. Yeah, yeah.
The bread course with the butter and the chicken dripping sauce. Wow. I mean, it was just bread, but
yeah,
some of the best I've ever had. So
I mean, that's like that's the simple stuff.
Dinner was phenomenal. They did everything was from the farm.
Those experiences are often like that, where it's like you can't exactly remember the details. You just remember. It's that quote that lady says, where it's like people won't remember what you said or what you did. They'll remember how you made them feel. Right? Like I feel like that's what you're remembering.
Exactly.
Like you remember the feeling more so than like the individual moments, I guess.
For sure.
Just, what about worst meals? Is there like a bad meal you've like? I mean, I've had my fair share of bad meals in New York City.
Oh, I mean, I've had my fair share of bad meals, but I actually don't. I don't try to think about the bad meals if it is, or especially if I've cooked it. I always try to think about what the next thing is and how to make it better if I did it.
Right, and just move on.
Just move on. Yeah, forget about it. Exactly.
Is there a chef or restaurant that you've always wanted to get access to somewhere in the world? Doesn't even have to be in New York.
I mean, yes, there's a lot of them.
You're like, yeah, that's my dream shoot.
I mean, everybody from Thomas Keller to, Ferran, Renee, Marco Pirouet, Alex Alta down in Brazil. Yeah. Massimo, I mean, any of those guys would be phenomenal. Just because they've really defined who they are, and they have such a personality about them, and just a pride in their food. I mean, I know a lot of chefs have that, but like those guys are like the ones who I haven't worked with that I really would love to. Is
there any kind of ambition or goals that you have to like work towards that, or it's just kind of like if it somehow falls down the pipeline, I'm just going to be really excited about it? You don't have like this laundry list of people that you're reaching out to or being like, hey, here's my stuff if you ever want to collaborate?
I do market myself in that way, and I definitely have a laundry list of people that I reach out to, but I would say even more so the way that I'm going to probably get to those people that when I want to is through my spoon project. Where I know we haven't gotten into that yet, but it's kind of a way for me to approach somebody that I have an idea that I want to shoot, and it's something that they can relate to as well.
Because all chefs have the spoon. While we're on the topic, let's talk about that. Yeah. You have 3 of those pieces behind you.
Yeah. Angle it up just a little bit for you.
Yeah, let's do it.
I can jump into them as well on the screen share.
So while you're pulling it up, I'll tell this story because this is how we first got in touch. So Brent and I first got in touch because me and Patrick, who is the artist Dosfi, went to Atlanta and we ate at this restaurant there called Staple House. And in Staple House, there is a photo of a Lady Hamilton spoon, which is my all-time favorite spoon. And it's a big photo. It's what is the size? Maybe you can.
I think it's a 24 by 30.
Yeah, it's very large. It's posted on the wall in the restaurant, and I saw it and I was like, oh my God, that's crazy. So we were on our way out of the restaurant. I saw it in like the hallway leaving, and I asked whether it was the maitre d' at the door or the lady who was getting our code. I said, hey, who did this photograph and how do I get in contact with them? And she ended up having one of your cards there, which was perfect. So we were able to take one, and then I emailed you and we got in touch, but that was my big thing. And you have it up on the screen now. Yeah.
So the Spoonful project, Spoonful's inspiration is based around the spoon. It's I call it an abstract portrait of a chef. So I reach out to different chefs and kind of want to tell their story a bit more. And I ask them to bring their favorite spoon. Every chef amazingly has one. Mm-hmm. And if they don't, they can probably pick one that they always go to and use. And so basically we use the spoon as an extension of themselves, a little bit about them, who they are. And then the things that we plate around them are things that inspire them of why they cook, of who they are within their food, almost personality for them. So I've done probably about 50 of them so far. And am going through and trying to figure out what the best way to present this is. And I actually have a gallery in Iowa starting. That's where I grew up. So I thought it would be appropriate to start in my hometown. And then I'm working on a couple different other projects, presenting it in Atlanta, hopefully, in New York, and who knows where else.
Where in Iowa? Just out of my girlfriend went to Drake, so I've spent a lot of time.
I went to Iowa State personally, but I'm from the northwest corner in Lamar's.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is there one or maybe a couple that have interesting stories behind them, where the shoot was particularly interesting, or you weren't expecting that chef to do that when they expressed themselves?
So I would say Ryan's here on the left, the forger, excuse me, is Ryan and I met, and he had this idea that we were going to do, and he brought his spoon, and he's like, "We're doing it outside." And I was like, "Oh, well, I have, I usually do it on a white background, da 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 da." And he's like, "No, here's why I want to do it outside." I was like, "Awesome." He's connected to nature. He's finding nuts, mushrooms, edible flowers, everything like that, and it kind of made sense. It kind of tied it together in a very earthy quality, and very much his personality as well.
Right.
He's the head chef at Staple House there.
That's the one that I saw, and I took a photo of that one, and I remembered it, and I was like, I need to reach out to this photographer, and at least my initial plan was just to ask where it all came from, and because I've never seen anything like this before.
I always think about my photography and where I am and things that I want to tell. Make sure that I'm doing something that I'm happy with, that I haven't seen before. I mean, I know everything is kind of like a copy of something else. I think that's a Greenberg theory of art, that there is no original art.
Yeah, you steal like an artist or whatever
I had never seen anything in the food realm that was art driven. For me, I really wanted to find something that I could, tell a story with, have it be an ongoing project, and also be interesting to the audience that's seeing it. My goal wasn't to create a gallery out of it. It was more just to tell stories about chefs and who they are, where they came from, and that kind of thing. And so a little bit like going back, the evolution of the project and how it came to be was kind of all about, I was on a photo shoot for jams, and the prop stylist and I both combined probably had about 100 spoons there. Laid out all on the table, and I was just picking through them, like looking at them, admiring them, and kind of just really jiving with the shape, the different, like how many different styles of spoons there are. And I started picking up and putting jams in each different one and just shooting them straight down. And I showed it to a friend, and he was like, "Oh, that's really cool. Like, what are you gonna do with it?" And I was like, "I don't know." And then talked to another friend. I was on a photo shoot with Jody Williams from Bouvet, and asked her, I was like, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And she's like, "Every chef has a favorite spoon, right?" She's like, "This is mine." And I was like, "Oh, that," and the light bulb kind of went on. Yeah. Yeah. And then we started talking about like what goes around the spoon. And then it kind of evolved from like the perfect bite to kind of the things that inspire you, and more about like kind of an abstract way of thinking versus a literal. But some people are still inspired by what goes well together and flavor profiles and things like that. So it kind of does end up being like the perfect bite. So
it's so funny that that you're immortalizing a person without their face or their name attached to it, right? Like I don't know all of the chefs that you've put down on this project, but the first one that stood out in my mind, and I could totally tell that it was his, was Alex Stupak's.
Definitely. His is very, very iconic. I think that, yeah, it's just his style of dessert and like the folded ganache is exactly him.
Yep,
yeah.
Exactly. Has there been anything interesting that has I mean, obviously this kid from Seattle who has a podcast reaching out to you is a really interesting kind of transpiration from that. But I mean, obviously the goal for you would be to get in touch with more of these chefs and to tell their stories more. Has anybody else reached out to you outside of the realm of the project itself to say like, hey, I want to buy like 50 of these for my house, or you know what I mean?
So Staple House, where you saw them, actually was my first like presentation of it in a non-formal way. So I had reached out, I was going down to Atlanta, and I'd reached out to a couple different chefs down there wanting to kind of evolve this project and like take it to a different city because I'd only done it at that point in New York. Reached out to a few people down there through Empire State and was referred to a couple different people, and I had photographed at Empire State, so I knew a couple people there, and I knew Ryan Smith, and Ryan had just kind of left at that point and was going to do the Staple House thing. And he was like, oh, maybe you could use the raw space at Staple House to kind of shoot in and kind of have people come to you. So I reached out to Jen Heidinger and kind of started learning about who Staple House and the Giving Kitchen was. And for whoever doesn't know what the Giving Kitchen is, it's a nonprofit basically based around helping the chef community in hardships. And it is a great nonprofit in my opinion, and they do some awesome things. They just had their Giving Kitchen big fundraiser this last in January, at the end of January, and they did some awesome things.
I was there. That's where I was.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we were there for that event, and my friend who actually he's an artist here in Seattle. He was in Atlanta prior, and he does the menu art. So he will like draw on the menus and give it as a gift to the kitchen. And so he was involved with the Giving Kitchen last year and then presents it with his stuff. But he got hired to do live art at the Giving Kitchen event. So he did like 4 tree canvases, and that was his big thing. So that's why we were in Atlanta. This is how it goes so full circle.
Awesome.
But
yeah, so
totally super familiar. Love their stuff. Love their cause. It was really inspiring.
So the year before that, I donated 5 prints to them, and that's kind of how I got involved. So going down there and doing that, and so it's just like gave some prints to them just to raise some money. I think we raised $17,000 just with my prints, so I was super happy about that. And just to get it out, and then at that point, I gave Staple House some prints on loan, and that's where you saw them.
Are you using them? Is the goal ultimately to get them sold, have them seen more in restaurants? The gallery is the goal. Using them as a business card to another chef to be like, this is what I'd like to do with you.
So it's not necessarily a business card for me. It doesn't really get me in the door. This is more of a personal project. Things like I want to work with people that I think are interesting to me and that I want to tell their story more through this project. I think it's evolved that now that I have a gallery, a pop-up gallery coming up in my first exhibition, and I get to show 23 spoons in one space at one time and tell their stories with the stories that go along with them. And like that's evolved, and I think I definitely want a book now. Just putting it out there in the world,
Totally.
Anybody's listening who's a book producer, call me. I'm looking to do more galleries now. Just evolved. And I think there can be an education system around it if I wanted to, or there's a lot of different ways that I could take it.
Right. The stories is what attracts you to this series in general. I'm interested to hear a little bit more maybe about what attracts you to restaurants specifically, right? Because you could have gone the full bore food stylist route if food was the passion, right? Like there's something deeper there that attracts you to the chefs and the restaurants. Is it the styling of chefs' food, helping them market their food better? Is it immortalizing the food for them? Maybe it's like eating the food after the shoot. What does it for you with restaurants?
What does it with me with restaurants, I think is more about the collaboration effect. and getting to tell a story beyond the plate. You know, it is, like we mentioned earlier, like the things that make us remember about a dish isn't necessarily the food itself. It's the memories that go around it and that surround it. So at the same time, I want to make sure that I am kind of immortalizing the food in a way and making something that is good look great, you know, as good as I possibly can in every circumstance that I do. I think that collaboration of bringing the best light to it, I think, is where what really drives it.
I had a question, and you might have answered this prior towards the start of the show, but you, again, this is kind of a selfish question. You're the face of the New York City food photography and cocktail photography website and brand. Why not continue to market as Brent? Because again, I'm currently going through this struggle where it's like, should I market this dinner that I'm doing as Justin Khanna, or I have this other like brand in my head that's going to be a thing one day? Like, do I start it now when it's kind of like this deformed thing?
So yeah, I mean, I think for me, it all leads back to me, Brent, and whether somebody lands on my cocktail website page, it all pushes back to Brent Herrig eventually. I have the different websites because I think that I have enough content that I can kind of tell different stories. And, you know, if somebody lands on the cocktail webpage, they want to see cocktails. They don't want to see the portraits that I've done or the food stuff that I've done or the, you know, things like that. They want to see cocktails. So I'm actually at the point of like kind of changing up what NYC food photography is. And it's going to be more about the kitchens of New York and like portraits and even like interiors of restaurants and things like that to be more of a storytelling aspect.
And of course, just the good SEO that you get.
Yeah, of course. I mean, for my advice to you, I would say if you think that your brand will be something larger someday, you know, NYC Food Photography by Brent Herrig. You know, always connect it back to you.
Right, right. And that's been the whole goal the entire time, where I'm not kind of like going under this umbrella brand with any of this stuff. But it is kind of like you do want to make sure that it's targeted, and you do want to make sure that when that customer or client or whoever interacts with that, if they're there for cocktails, they're going to get a cocktail, not, you know, like here's this portrait of this chef plating a dish, because that's not what, you know. So I totally get it.
Yeah.
But yeah, just curious if you,
I think it's a little bit of an internal struggle with myself of that people do want to see one or two things. And for any photographer out there, you know, you can only have so many images on your website before people just get overwhelmed. So always be putting your best work up front, because most people don't last on a page more than 15 seconds.
Right.
Before they, you know, our attention spans are only so long.
Absolutely. You have a little bit of video work on your website. Are you moving more into video at all in 2018 or going forward, or that was just something that you did one-off and you're publishing it because you're showing that you can do video if need be?
I can do video. I do video. I'm doing it 2 weeks from now, so looking forward to that. And it's something that, like, you know, every client asks for, and it's definitely two different mindsets in a photographer to have a still idea and what's good as a still idea versus a moving idea, and to flip that in the moment is a hard thing to do. So I do produce both, but at separate times.
Sure.
But yeah, I think in the evolving media, it's all about moving imagery. Even whether
video now,
everybody wants video, of course. And so, I mean, if you're not in the video game, you're kind of, you know, second rate.
How was that learning process for you from going through doing stills? What were some particular takeaways that you had?
It was a learning process, of course. The takeaways that I kind of did have were trial and error. Shooting things, it's the same camera. Like, for me, it is. And, you know, so I was comfortable with the camera in my hand. I have the eye for the image. So it's just making the transition and how does that, you know, slightly move, or how does the action happen? So it's just a lot of like research. I mean, I think right now in today's age, with all of the great documentaries that are out there, I think we can you can really get an eye for like how people see food.
Do you think there's a difference? So I've had this problem. I started with film photography, and then I kind of got a little bit more into photography, but then video made its way into my life, and I got really into that. Do you feel like there is and I'm curious to see if you agree with me on this point or not. With photography, a lot of it has to be done right there in the moment, right? Like your composition has to be there, the lighting has to be there, and the edit will kind of help supplement that. With a video, a lot of times you can kind of just get a ton of footage, and then the edit is where the story happens. Do you feel the same way about that, or?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think you still have to go into the video the same way that you go into the stills, in my opinion. You know, videographers and DPs out there would definitely disagree with me, I'm sure. But I always go in thinking of what the final cut's going to be, and trying to have that story semi-hashed out of, you know, different angles that I want to go for. And then along the way, if something happens, then let's go with it, you know, try to shoot it a couple times and make sure that we capture it and move on, you know, keep going.
So you're still marketing yourself as a full bore photographer, and the video projects for you are just kind of like a nice bonus. Like if the client says, I want video, you say, sure, I'd love to do video. This is my rate kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I'm pushing towards and pushing in for 2018, especially. I want to get into the video game as well.
Because that's also another curious thing, right? Do you say that you want to learn it? I mean, at this point in your career, you could probably realistically hire someone to edit for you. Is that something that you've thought about?
Definitely. I mean, it's something right now I do. You know, collaborating with video is 100% of what they have to do. Knowing your strengths as well for anybody. If you're not good at something, you know, find somebody who is. Work with them, collaborate with them. And that's a lot about what video is. You know, I have a good eye for it. I can capture it. And then I can tell you how I want it to be edited, but I have not yet learned the editing a lot. I mean, I can edit. It's not the greatest.
It's
a learning curve for sure. You know,
this is actually a perfect segue into a question I had. You have a quote, and I'd love for you to elaborate on it. It goes, a good life should be lived without a GPS and always stuck in a construction, trying to find your way out. In other words, live life with detours.
So this quote came to me like with the idea that more about travel and adventure in life, and how the best moments that I have are the ones that aren't planned. That, you know, you turn the wrong way and you happen to go by a place and you see something you like and you just stop. It's the moments where, like, you know, I don't like going, you know, I do my research when I go to different towns and cities for food, but some of the best places I've eaten at have been ones that I've just stumbled upon, you know. And one, for example, in Atlanta is Bee's Cafe. Best fried chicken, like, ever. And it's like this small little cafe, but there is so much soul in that restaurant, and it's just a great place, you know.
When did that quote come into your life? When did you start kind of, or did someone say that, or is that something that you generated, or you kind of?
No, I generated that quote through marketing efforts and copywriting. Yep. You know, copywriting is a big thing in the marketing idea. So it's something that I've lived my life, and I love traveling. I love exploring new places, you know, getting lost and finding your way out, you know, that kind of thing.
Right. And the way that I got that was through, I think, another interview you did, but also it's on your website. And yep. The way that you market yourself is so key, right? Because it can just, how much is that? Is it just your work versus how you're marketing yourself outright and saying, like, this is why I want to hire you. This is why I'm a pleasure to work with, not just I'm going to give you great photos. What do you think about when you're marketing yourself?
Marketing is everything to me, in my opinion. If you're not marketing yourself, you might as well not be doing photography. It's like if you open a restaurant and the only thing you're hoping on is that people walk by and see your sign and that they might come in and they, you know, so I think it's the same idea that you want to make sure that you're putting your identity out there and who you are. You know, I always ask the question in my, you know, marketing things of like, what's your client talking about? What do they want to approach? Like, I am easy to work with. You know, I love figuring out your problems and helping something that you're having problems with. And if I can do it, let's do it together, you know?
Sure.
So
and that's
I mean,
really,
yeah, definitely. I mean, I think marketing is something that I've really always strived for. And if anybody's in college and listening and watching to this, do some marketing, learn it. It's something that, you know, I did marketing in college. I had an entrepreneurial minor, and dove into the marketing. I loved it. You know, photography and like the creative career is all about sales. And if you can't walk into somebody's, you know, restaurant and say, hey, my name's Brent, I want to work with you. Here's my work. You know, how are they going to find you? Good SEO, yes, but that you can't rely on that.
That's my biggest, like, I had this fear. It was a fear to kind of like put myself out there when I first started in the industry, because for cooks, and maybe this is an interesting conversation to have, is that we oftentimes are worker bees, right? Like if we were to quote unquote, market ourselves online, it would be kind of like, look at this dish that I plated. That's another chef's food. We aren't ever really in that situation where we're creating something that is our own, even though we literally made it from start to finish, right? Like we took it from raw ingredient to finished product. And this is me talking from like a line cook perspective, right? It's not like you're running the show or it's your menu, but when you're first starting off, that would have been my question if I was back in culinary school. Like, how do I market when what I would be marketing is someone else's creative? Does that make sense?
I think you always have you always, like, especially today with Instagram, stories, and, you know, however you want to put yourself out there, there is ways to tell the things that you're doing right now. And there's ways to, even if it is somebody else's cooking, if you did it, you know, you're showing what you're doing right now. And I think that's something that, you know, that's kind of why I got into travel photography as well. And how I kind of made that journey. I was traveling the world as an assistant, and at the same time, you know, we'd have downtime and I'd capture some images while I was on the road, and told my story of where I was at the time. I think with Instagram, definitely for chefs, it is something that you can constantly be doing. I know it's a lot to do, but
I mean, yeah, like
marketing is an ever ongoing battle.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like, how are you going to justify like putting yourself in the weeds during service because you're busy getting photos for marketing, right? Like, how do you balance that as well? Like, that's another like super hard thing. But
obviously, don't do the marketing if you're, you know, only 10 seconds left on that steak, of course. But sorry guys, I overcooked it, but I got the perfect photo.
Right here, I gotta capture it.
Yep. Nobody's gonna care about that. So I mean, always do your job first, and then, you know, find the time that is you know, and they can do that.
Right. And I literally had this question the other day from a friend of mine who was asking, you know, like, and I straight up told him, I was like, you need to be taking what is, it's like, that's something that I really regret not doing in the beginning of my career when I was, whether it's in college or my first few jobs or when I was staging, is like, I wish I had content from back then to reference back to now, because it's so much of what I'm talking about now is how to be like a culinary student and a line cook, because helping the industry, at least in the beginning, is what I'm interested in. But yeah, just speaking your truth. Like, I'm a line cook and this is what I'm doing. And this is like, this is what my day to day looks like, because people will find that interesting and it will give you the experience of talking about what you're doing. Because that was the biggest thing that hurt me when I first started marketing my own menus and my own events, is that was my first time ever talking about my own food. It's like
I
a
think
force you can't expect to be good right off the bat, even though you've been cooking for almost 10 years.
A little bit about something like that idea of like going back and looking back. Use Instagram as a documentary tool as well for yourself. Like, what were the dishes you were cooking at the time? Where did you go wrong? Oh, that was that dish that I, needed to add that to, or whatever it was. Like, use it more as a storytelling for your marketing, but use it as a documentary tool for yourself as much,
And that's what I told this friend of mine. I was like, you don't have to use it now, but it's like people will like to know that you were working on food 4 years ago. You know what I mean? When it comes to be that time, because that's what you're going to end up using for marketing. I wish I had what my first day at XYZ restaurant looked like and what I was thinking, what I was feeling, because it's what I'm talking about now. It's so important. Marketing is so important. It's so underrated, especially in the chef realm. It's like looked down upon for chefs to market themselves.
I think there's a fine line of being too cheesy with your marketing and too forward versus being just who you are and like doing it for the sake of like, I want to tell a story. That's authenticity for sure.
Totally. Question from an audience member. Thomas asks, what gear do you use? And then I want to follow it up with, what does the gear matter?
I'll flip that question and say the gear does not matter at all. Mm-hmm. The best camera I have is the camera that I have with me. So whether it is my phone or my Canon 5D Mark, or 5DS, it's all about, you don't have to have a great camera to create a great photo. You have to understand the light and where you are, obviously, but the camera is secondary. So it's the same. I mean, it's so hard because it's the whole reason that I started this podcast. It's the sole reason that I haven't missed a week of this podcast. It's a reason that I'm starting to even transform it into doing smaller, shorter form podcast episodes, because I don't want to be the gear guy, even though my gear videos are the most popular videos. And it's like what I love talking about and why people discover my channel. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. There's so much more to it. A knife is a knife. Even, if you have to go into a kitchen with shitty knives, I mean, yeah, you can still get the job done.
Totally.
Yeah. What's your favorite spoon? Do you have one?
Yeah, it has to be. It's probably one of my Lady Hamiltons, just because I love that shape. It's the spoon that I learned how to cornell on. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's just it's beautiful. It's really comfortable. There's a couple other ones. I got one from my parents' wedding silver set. Mm-hmm. That's really, really meaningful, just because it's in the family. I'm also kind of a scumbag, and sometimes if I'm having a really good meal at a restaurant, I will swipe a spoon from them.
I've done that too.
Which it seems like a scumbag move, but I've done my research online with people that steal stuff from restaurants, and they'll literally steal like the statue next to the maitre d' stand, like a $3,000 statue. They will just walk out with it, or like a leather menu cover that's like a $200 menu cover, and then I don't feel so bad about it. But I have been known to. I had a really good meal at a 3-star in Hong Kong, and they may or may not have a spoon missing from them. I haven't gotten the chefs that I've worked for haven't been the biggest spoon nerds, and a lot of chefs that I know wouldn't really give their spoons for anything. I like gifting spoons. I like taking spoons that I have, and if I meet someone that I really enjoy working with or really kind of build a connection with, I'll give them a spoon. And to me, that has way more of a story behind it because as chefs, it is weird. All of our spoons do have a story attached. If I had to pick one, I probably could go through my toolbox and find one. I'm like, yep, I want to shoot with this one. Awesome. But right off the top of my head, I don't pick one where I'm like, yeah, that's my favorite spoon. Anything that I had a time in my career where I really wanted to make my own spoon. I really, I went through this whole process of figuring out how it's done. There was this place in Norway where they made really high-end quality Scandinavian silver. And he took us through the whole shop where they have like the presses where it's like a dome and then another dome on top of it. You stick a metal thing in and it comes down with like 6,000 pounds of pressure and it just stamps it. And then they go through and hand finish them all. And I was just thinking about what it would look like to make my own, where it's like, because Lady Hamiltons aren't easy to find. The only guy who's really making mass produced spoons for the chef is Grey Kunz. And no one likes those spoons. I mean, like anybody, there's a reason that maybe you have taken a photograph of a Grey Kunz, but I mean, one, right? Like there's a reason, because they all have to have a story and they all have to, it's my favorite activity still to this day. My girlfriend and I went to the flea market on last Sunday and I was poking around for spoons, which is really enjoyable.
Yeah. Again, to go back to the favorite meal, it's like, it's that memory that goes along with it. You know, it might be the perfect tool for the job, but there are many tools for the job, and like the one that really resonates is the one that the story is behind.
Yep, totally.
Look forward to shooting yours one day.
Oh yeah, I hope so. And next time you come to Willows, I would love to cook for you as well, and then we can do a little spoon photo shoot. I'm checking just to see if there's any questions on Instagram. There is not. I posted before we started to see if there was anybody that wanted to ask a little last minute question. We've talked about it a million times. Where can people find you online? Where do you want people to specifically go?
I would say go either BrentHerrig.com, cocktail.com, cocktailphotographer.com, or nycfoodphotography.com. Like I said, all will take you to the same place. So
yeah, that's perfect. And I'm absolutely going to also link up the spoons gallery as well in the show notes, so everyone can take a look at that. Brent, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you someday.
Yeah, this is fantastic. We'll definitely be in touch. This won't be the first time.
Sounds good. Anytime.
Thanks a lot, Brent. You made it. You're at the end of this interview. I hope you gained a thing or two from this episode. Comment or tweet at me with your biggest takeaway, because I'm sure Brent would love to hear that as well. I certainly love getting your feedback as well on this new style of a video interview. If you have someone that you want me to interview here on this show, please let me know. I'm always open to getting more guests on this show that you folks are excited about. Thank you so much for your ears. I really appreciate your attention. My name's Justin Khanna. Have a good one.